how does it unfold from there? Well, I immediately went down to, see, I didn't know anybody. There are actually a lot of Baba lovers there, I know now. A lot of people heard of Baba and became Baba lovers at that talk. And there are other people who already were Baba lovers. I mean, 1,000 people who I got to know very quickly, but I didn't know any of them then. I just was, I hadn't known any Buddhists. I hadn't known any nihilists who were going to blow up the world. It was just, I was living in this sort of mental space, so I didn't know any Baba lovers. So I went out to the bookstore, and they had really good bookstores in those days. So I bought the Discourses, and I bought God Speaks, and I read them right away. And I have a good mind for that sort of thing. So I really took the greatest interest in it. And Alan Cohen had mentioned that there was a center in Myrtle Beach that he had been to, and he might have mentioned Kitty Davey and Elizabeth Patterson, probably did. So I was aware of it, and my roommate and I immediately stopped smoking marijuana. I had been doing that, but of course I didn't take LSD because of what Baba said about it, but I stopped smoking marijuana right away. And we were taking in crash padders. A crash pad is, you have an apartment and somebody wants to stay there, some bum, hippie person looking for a place to sleep. Our rule was if anybody asked us, we would let them sleep in our room. So it was quite a scene. Our room was quite a scene because there were a lot of those people in Harvard Square in those days. So I came back one day and my roommate said, oh, there's somebody who's going to be spending the night here. And I said, okay. And he said, oh, he knows about Mayor Baba. And so I immediately asked him, and I don't know, some of you will know Walter Witkowski. He's been associated with the center since those days. He was Joseph then, and he had hair down to here, but he had this very bright face. And he had just been to the center in Myrtle Beach, and he had the address right in his wallet. So I got it, and I immediately wrote, and then as soon as the semester was over, my plans for becoming a beggar were over then, because I read, Baba said, be practical and all that stuff. So I went down to Myrtle Beach, and in January, so I met Kitty, and I met Elizabeth, and I met Jane Haynes, and all sorts of other people. As a matter of fact, when I walked into Pine Lodge the very first time, which is where you went at first in those days, somebody said, Jai Baba. And I said, what does Jai Baba mean? And it was Alan Wagner, of all people. Some of you will know him. So he explained, he happened to be there, and he explained Jai Baba. So I immediately became part of the whole Baba. There was a big Baba community in Cambridge, as a matter of fact. A lot of people were there. So I became part of that group. And very soon after so then I realized I had to have a regular life. So after college, actually, I went down to Myrtle Beach, and I was the book man at Sheriar Press for 2 years, 74 to 76. And I went back to graduate school and became a professor of medieval literature. And in 1993, I've been in the academic world, my whole career was there, and this kind of intellectual world, I've always had open channels to it. But the truth is that I really don't like that world at all, and I have no respect for it either. I mean, all these brainy people, what good are their brains worth if they can't have the humility to find God? I still think that. I know there are a lot of good people there, but I don't respect that world, I will say. So then in 1993, 92, 93, one of Baba's disciples, Mandali Bhau Kalchuri, I got a communication from him. He had had an assistant, a fellow named John Connor, who was leaving after having been Bau's assistant for 10 years, was going back to America, getting married. And Bau needed someone, so he had was inviting me to come. And I had, it wasn't, again, a very practical thing to do. I had just gotten tenure. I'd published a book at Princeton University Press. Big deal. When you're a professor, you can be the worst teacher who ever lived. It matters not at all. But if you publish at big places, you're praised to the skies. Your students may think you're a piece of garbage, but the students being garbage themselves don't count. That was the reality of how you make a career in the kind of university I was at. So I just gotten tenure and a lot of publication, but I didn't like it one little bit. Oh, here's a little thing about how I'm going on and on, but how I wound up getting my job. I didn't want to become a professor at all. It was a fate worse than death to me. But for various reasons, I felt that Baba wanted me to do it. There were some things that happened. So I had gotten my PhD, and all throughout my academic career, I realized there's no point in trying to pursue spiritual topics. This world is not open to them. And I sort of had the idea I could come up with some clever allegorical system where I would be talking in my own language about spiritual things, but it would look like something else to other people. They were so smart, they're very intelligent. I mean, much, much more intelligent than I am. I saw a lot of people like that. So it sort of taught me the worth, and intelligence has a value, but it doesn't have the highest value at all. But I was trying to get a job. I wound up getting my specialization in medieval studies, in Old English, right? Like, this is before, it's Beowulf, way, way back, which is about as impractical a branch of medieval studies as I could possibly have gone into. It's not like you come out and say, I have a PhD in Beowulf, I'm waiting for the job offers, And even in English departments, the jobs were non-existent, I had followed that for all sorts of various reasons. I felt that, okay, Baba, when a door opens, I'll go through it. Career is of no worth to me, but that's how I'll do it. So I wound up in that field of study for various reasons. I had a very good professor. But I did get a job interview at Louisiana State University. This is actually a plum of a job. But I applied for 150 terrible jobs, and I couldn't get them. The sorts of jobs that if they had given me the job offer, I would have said yes, and then fulfilled my 16-year-old ambitions and gone and shot myself in the head. Horrible jobs. I couldn't get those. But this was a plum. So I got an on-campus interview, and usually they invite 3 or 4 people and you hear a month later, but it was the last day and the chairman was taking me to the airport. And I had been complaining to Baba, like, all my friends are moving to India or Myrtle Beach, and I'm stuck in this horrible, cold, dry world where I don't have any Baba friends, complaining and feeling sorry for myself all over the place. So it was a Sunday, and the chairman was taking me to the airport, and when he did, he said, we're offering you the job. And it was Amarchidi Day, noon. So it's like, it was like, I was waiting for a sign for Baba. Well, you can't get a clearer indication than that, It was like Baba saying, I've been behind all of this and I want you there. So I wound up studying medieval literature, and I got a real training in all sorts of things that I do now. I would never have prescribed it for myself. Textual study, manuscripts, textual editing. I didn't do that as my own scholarship, but I had to learn about it. In medieval studies, you learn more about that than you do in any other branch of English literary studies. So when it came up in India, linguistics, how to deal with linguistic problems, how to do endnotes and footnotes and that sort of thing. So I had no idea, but when I moved to India, that's been my work for the last 20 years. So I really feel like Baba did give me exactly the training I needed for the life I've lived since then. I got the job in 1984, and I had a fellowship my last year. I was not in there, but I got, Bao asked me to come in 1992 to 93. And so I moved to India in 1993. Again, I had spared my parents the shock of my becoming a beggar in 1974. They got the shock in 1993 because I had just gotten tenure, and I didn't have hardly any money. As an assistant professor, you don't get much at all. So it was really a reckless thing to do from their point of view. And if Baba were not who he was, it was a completely impractical thing to do. No money. I think I had $10,000, something like that, and I could never get a job like that again. It was out of the question. But I felt when I heard this, Baba was inviting me to come, I felt like Baba was saying to me, okay, Ward, you've been weeping and wailing and moaning and complaining about how you don't like it in the academic world and how you want to be in some place where there are Baba lovers. Okay, are you coming or are you not? And I just felt, okay, there are times in life where you just have to jump off a cliff. And this was one of them. And here's the funny thing that happened. Even since all my financial worries ended with that, because I had practically no money. I had to live on $100 a year. So I didn't think about it, do you want to go and do this? Well, no, I can't. And it was very, very simple. And so actually, and then when my parents passed away, I got a certain inheritance, which I'm living on now. So even though it was, from a material point of view, was a very reckless thing to do, it was the end of my problems in the material world. I haven't had to think about it since then, hardly at all. It was a really good lesson, about, I do feel it was a call from Baba. And when he calls, through almost all of life, you have to be practical, right? But there are certain moments where you just have to do what he says. And that's the best thing. So that was my experience for sure. Well, that was a very different sort of an age. And within the framework of that age, I would say that Beowulf does embody the high values, the highest values. He's actually a rather selfless hero. A lot of the heroes of epics were not, but he was. He's a great figure. It's a great poem, too. Yeah. No, I like it. Also, I did a lot of work with my scholarship with Homer, who is, I would rank as the greatest poet of the Western world. So I read Homer in the Greek and did comparative scholarship with this colossally great poet. Well, it's within the framework of that time in that culture, which was very warlike. And so people of the present era, it takes, I feel, some work to understand where they were. But bravery, strength, ability to defeat opponents. He certainly takes on great hazards upon himself for the benefit of his tribe. And there's a plot there where he helps somebody else because of a connection with his father. So it's in these cultures, fighting is really necessary. Like even the code of vengeance, if somebody kills someone in your tribe, it's a moral obligation to kill someone in their tribe, because if you don't, people will regard your tribe as, you can just walk all over them and kill them all. It's quite different than our way of thinking. We think of vengeance as bad, but they didn't. It was actually a moral obligation. So in all these sorts of ways, he was a very great figure, I would say. Homer is more complex. It's more of a complex story, but these are giant figures that Homer has created. Francis Brabazon in Stay with God refers to Homer more than any other literary figure. He has a whole page and a half, actually, where he retells some of the stuff from Homer. He was a admirer of Homer, as anyone would be who's read him. It's like Shakespeare. What do you say about a giant like that? The way that Francis Brabazon interprets the Odyssey may well be true. That is, he interprets it kind of as an allegory, where Odysseus, you sort of need to know the story of the Odyssey, but the victory over Troy has just been accomplished at the start of the Odyssey, and he's traveling back to his home in Ithaca, his homeland, where Penelope is, his wife is waiting for him, and he goes through tremendous adventures and tremendous difficulties. These are so famous stories, the Cyclops and Scylla and Charybdis, all these tremendous things. And finally, he arrives at a king, Alcinous, who has magic boats that can carry you anywhere in the world over a single nighttime. So I think Francis interpreted that as the symbol for the perfect master, and that does make sense. And when he gets back, he reestablishes himself, kills all the people who had been beleaguering his wife. And so I think he construes it as an allegory of the journey to God realization and then the reestablishment of a perfect master. He sees Odysseus as a symbol of a perfect master, and that could very well be true. Penelope is, that's his wife, a beautiful character, reminds me of Mara more than any other character in Western literature. She's really a beautiful, beautiful person. Yeah, it's a spectacular epic. In Greece, in ancient Greece, they had all these hotshots in the 5th century BC. They invented democracy, and they had Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, 3 of the greatest playwrights who ever lived, and they built the Parthenon, and Phidias, the genius sculptor, and Socrates was there. All this was going on. In that context, Homer was regarded as something almost like Holy Scripture. They didn't quite attribute that to him, but he was venerated by absolutely everybody. So he had a colossal impact on that civilization, deservedly, in my opinion. Yeah, the Iliad is more complex, and it shows Achilles, the greatest warrior of his time, being humiliated by the king, his overlord, Agamemnon, at the very beginning. So Achilles withdraws from battle, and his people, the Achaeans, are getting trounced by the Trojans under Hector, their great champion. And then Achilles returns to battle for certain reason and destroys the Trojans and kills Hector. And it ends with the death of Hector. Troy hasn't fallen yet. That's a storyline. Again, it's really within the context of these heroic values. It's a little bit hard for moderns to get attuned to it because Achilles just kills one person after another. But when I read it, I feel it's an aspect of God being displayed. The wrath and the glory of God is being manifested through him. There's much more I could say. There's a particular passage in Stay with God where Francis, it's the first time he uses the phrase stay with God, actually. And he brings up Hector and Hector's wife Andromache. And it's, if you know the story and where that comes from, it's very, very powerful reference. Francis used the Odyssey a lot. He used in his biography of Stay with God, there's the first section, and he uses, he construes Odysseus's journey, arduous journey through these adventures as the spiritual path. And he uses it to illustrate the musts. He construes the musts as characters in that world and on that journey. And that Homer is symbolically representing that. And that very well could be. He has a whole page and a half where he rehearses stories from the Odyssey. So I think he took it as representing high spiritual truth. And Achilles is a great and glorious hero, actually. And I actually would see it that way too. Coming from the modern age, you really have to get acculturated to understand these ancient epics. They don't fit in with our current ideologies at all. But the greatness of the poetry is beyond any question at all. It's the greatest poetry I've ever read in its original language, for sure. Yeah, when I moved to India, I thought my, scholarly work was done. I just assumed that was it. It would never come back to me. And so I was, Bau Kalchuri, one of Baba's Mandali, I was his secretary. And I took dictation and filed letters, and then he became the chairman, and so I would take, I helped with writing up reports, and it was kind of office work. That's what I was doing, and I just thought that was the rest of my life. I never even thought at all about literary things. But then I was on a committee, the publication committee at the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. And at the end, Marwan Jesawala was on it. And we had just completed our meeting, had about 2 minutes left. Typical Marwan, and he said, before we go, I just want something I want to mention. And it turns out that Eruch had for 20 years this briefcase of literary manuscripts. And Eruch, that's of course Marwan's brother, had asked, Eruch kept a deep secret about it. Hardly anybody had been told. But Eruch had asked Marwan to read through it. And when Marwan moved there, 1991 or 92, then Eruch asked him again, now read it seriously. The first time when Eruch said, everyone's asking me about this book, does this have anything to do with Baba's book, the book that's been lost? And Marwan read it and gave the most sensible answer I've ever heard. He said, I really don't know its relation to the book because I haven't read the book. And I wish everyone had as much common sense as Marwan did. But then Marwan would bring it up with Eruch from time to time and say, do you want anything done with these manuscripts? It would be better if the work started while you Mandali were still alive. And Eruch, so I just don't have any time to deal with this now. And finally, Marwan brought it up and said, we have people now who can work on this. We should really start if you ever want it to be done. And Eruch said, if you think this material would be of value to Baba's lovers, and if it doesn't contain contradictions with things Baba has said elsewhere that would be very upsetting to their minds, go ahead. So at that meeting, Marwan brought all of this out. Bao at the time was in America, and it contained the source manuscripts for what has been published now as Infinite Intelligence, Tiffin Lectures, and Creationist Causes, those 3 books. And they had been discovered this way. Soon after Baba dropped the body, Balna II was visiting Merazad. He hadn't moved to Merazad yet. But Eruch sent him to look at the content, search through what's called the rice go-down. It's still there, you can see it. It's one of those little, go-down means a storage room, where they kept the rice. And Eruch must have had an intimation that something was there. Why would he ask Bao to do that? Eruch wouldn't go himself because that was on the women's side, and Eruch never went there. On rare occasions he would. But so Bao found this briefcase and brought it back to Eruch, who had had it for all this time. And those 3 manuscripts were there. And when Bao came back from America, he was absolutely thrilled about it all. And for a whole year, Bao and I, he was chairman actually, but he closed his office from 9 in the morning until 2. And we did nothing but go through these manuscripts. We went through it like a bat out of hell. It was like so quickly. It was like driving through, Mahatma Gandhi Road in Ahmednagar at 50 miles an hour trying not to kill people. It was like that. And we got through all of it in a preliminary pass. But then Bao had to step out and go back to his work as chairman. And Merwan Jeswal and I then went into it in more depth. So the first book to come out was Infinite Intelligence. It was a huge editing project based on a handwritten manuscript. I mean, I can talk forever about these things. It's been my life. And it turned out that all that I had studied was most pertinent. I mean, I knew a good bit about textual editing. I knew how to start anyway. I've learned a lot since then, and how to deal with manuscripts and how to deal with sources and referencing sources and how editing should be done. That's been a very big question, We're editing material based on Baba's dictations. So what prerogatives do you have and what prerogatives do you not have when you're putting it into readable English, which is what we were doing. I mean, I can really talk about this at length. It's been a deep meditation. And it came out in 2005 as a book. There are all these, we have a whole big editorial policy at the Trust as to whether something should be designated as a work of Meher Baba's own authorship. And there's a crucial statement in Meher Baba's last will and testament, actually, that's the foundation for the policy. So this, Baba talks about my literary works, published and unpublished, direct and indirect, and so forth. So the Trust determined this to be a work of Baba's authorship. Tiffin Lectures also, and Creation and Its Causes also. Merwan kind of stepped out of it after Infinite Intelligence. He had too much to do at Merazad, and also he was getting old and not in the best of health. But I would talk to him a lot about Tiffin Lectures and any crucial decision. Tiffin Lectures are talks Baba gave to the Mandali in 1926-27, based on Chanji's diaries. So that came out in 2017. Also, we did a revised 6th edition of the Discourses, the 3-volume set that was published in 1967. The issue arose whether that should get republished. I mean, I could say a lot about that. So we did. There's a revised 6th edition of the Discourses, and Early Messages to the West also has stuff like this. So there are a lot of projects I've worked on. But the most recent one was Creation and Its Causes, which is talks Baba gave to the Meher Ashram boys. We've been having sessions here on that subject. And they're amazing talks, just amazing talks. So that completes the material in that leather briefcase. So that turned out to set the agenda for me for the next 25 years when Merwan brought that out. So I've become a textual editor. I never dreamed that would happen when I moved to India. I thought that was completely done. On Baba's will, I don't know how many people are aware that he has a will, last will and testament. In 1967, signed by him, Mani and Eruch witnessed it. And there are 7 clauses. The last is just nominal. And 3 of them are on things like the house in Pune and that sort of stuff. And 3 of them deal with copyright. And it says, this isn't word for word, but it's not far from it. Accepting the copyrights he had given to Sufism, he said, I own the copyrights in all my literary works. Baba has that phrase, literary works, published and unpublished, direct and indirect, such as, and then he has a whole list, not of works, but genres, like discourses, sayings, messages, charts, maps, things like that. It's sort of like everything that they could think of. And then there are other things about how this would be given to the Avatar Meher Baba Trust. That was essentially what it said. So what we had have a whole state policy statement on this at the Trust, 20-page policy statement on Baba's unpublished words, because he says published and unpublished, direct and indirect. So if we have to, we have to presume that Baba was speaking in a language that would be intelligible to people, if it's in his last will and testament. So what does direct and indirect mean? I would say a clear case of indirect would be something in a diary, where Baba didn't actually dictate it to someone and go over it with the person, but somebody took a diary. And these are from Chanji's diaries. So we take these as unpublished and indirect on basis of those terms in Baba's last will and testament. This is kind of a big deal because, these are being presented to the world as Baba's words, the words of the avatar of the age. So, what counts and what does not count, it's going to matter a lot. So we've tried to be completely transparent. In the back of these books, there's a great deal of content in the supplements on these sorts of topics. What the evidence is, what the manuscripts are, what's been done with it in editorial terms. The original manuscripts are all put up on the Trust website. So if somebody reads Infinite Intelligence and says, well, why should I believe these are Baba's words? Okay, well, here's the evidence, here's the source manuscript, here are the indications of it. It's going to matter a lot in the course of time. But Baba's last will and actually the book I'm working on right now and it's going to come out soon, it's called Imprints of the Silent Word, the earliest published discourses of Avatar Meher Baba. And this has things published under his name in a magazine called The Meher Message, 1929-1931, that Ramju Abdullah reworked and published as a book in 1933. Sri Meher Baba, His Philosophy and Teachings. People don't tend to know about this. And then Ghani reworked it and republished it in an expanded form in the Meher Baba Journal, 1941 to 42. And it would have been a real question what we're going to say about who is the author of this, because these two Mandali did a lot with it. It so happens that a piece of, this is, from the standpoint of a textual editor, this is a miracle. It really is to me, a thing signed by Meher Baba himself. And I'd have to read it out and unpack it, but it says, refers to Ramju's book and a reworking of it, obviously referring to what Ghani did in the Meher Baba Journal under another title, published with Meher Baba as author. It actually has those very words, signed Emisarani. So that settles that question. We're going to publish this as Baba's words. So there are all kinds of questions about how we're to think of Baba's words, as a matter of fact. Yeah. And textual editing is the process of, in the case of these unpublished things, you have a raw manuscript, and there is a statement of Baba's where he says, he's referring to, it was in 1927, he says, my messages can be recomposed in stylish and forceful language, but the meaning and spirit must remain unchanged. He said that. That's in the Combined Diary. And the source manuscript of Infinite Intelligence obviously needs to be edited. It's unreadable. It's very well done in its own way, but they're long sentences for 2/3 of a page with brackets within brackets and parentheses within parentheses. Sometimes there'll be 4 layers of them. And to get the subject for the verb down here, you have to count the brackets and go back to here. Nobody could read that. And it's, so, Marwan and I spent a lot of time trying to preserve the meaning of it faithfully and yet make it into something readable. So that's been done with these manuscripts. So people will have a lot of questions. They'll, somebody would, if somebody says, who do you think you are to rewrite these and publish these as Mayor Baba's words? And the only answer I can give is, well, Baba asked for it to be done. It's right there in his last will and testament, And if someone wants to call it into question, all right, you can, You may say this a lousy job was done. Anybody could say that. This is really going to matter a lot in the future. But textual scholarship is the craft and science of working with materials like this. And like a really big thing is where the spirit and meaning remains unchanged. I could talk for hours about that. How you don't change the meaning, but make it readable. Some people might say that's impossible. I don't agree. I think it is possible. I think it is possible to identify what the core meaning is here. It means this and not anything else. And to reproduce precisely that meaning. Actually, Baba asked Francis Brabazon to do that with God Speaks. And you have in the archives about 20 pages where Francis started that. You have to get in touch with him on the Ouija board and get him to finish the job. Yeah. Well, of course, the New Testament was written in Greek when Jesus spoke in Aramaic. But I think they were trying to faithfully record what they had heard. They weren't, highly educated people. They were kind of simple folk at the time. But I can really say, about the subject of meaning, I've meditated on this for years and years. If you go into a craft, you learn about the craft. So I've gone into this in depth. And if you take a sentence, it is possible to identify the truth conditions of that sentence. That is to say, for this sentence to be true, what state of affairs must exist in empirical reality for this to be true? Like, let's say I say, Michael LePage is sitting in this white chair. Well, for that to be true, an individual known as Michael LePage, there has to exist such a person, has to be sitting on that actual chair. It doesn't say that he came from his house this morning at 9:30, or that he's going to be traveling to Sydney in 3 months from now. It doesn't say that. You actually can specify what the truth conditions of that utterance are. And if you train your mind and not bring in other things, if you really train your mind to identify that, you could do a pretty good job, where I think most people would say, yeah, that is what it says. And Baba said the spirit and meaning. As to the spirit of it, you try to have the ambience and flavor. That's more subjective in a way. But if it talks to boys, you probably don't use a lot of Deshmukhisms. Deshmukh love to use these very fancy words, and I personally enjoy it myself. But this isn't the place for it. A bunch of talks to the boys. It has to be fluent, read fluently. Baba told Francis to do that too with Stay with God. Same thing. But you can change the spirit would be the connotative aspect of it. And again, I can really talk at great length about this. So you try to create a feeling of the original context where Baba gave it, where it doesn't spoil that somehow. But he said stylish and forceful language. He said that can be done. So I could, with forceful, have good verbs. A lot of times with the drab writing we get in the diaries, the verbs are, is. There's no life in them. So you can do a lot to take a noun element and make it into the verbal element, and the sentence comes to life. There are a lot of things you can do like that. It's kind of working with your hands tied, because if, an editor doesn't have the freedom to say, well, this is what I think it means, or this is my interpretation. And that's the concern a lot of people would have. They'd say, well, why should I believe this is what Baba said, not what you're saying? It's a fair concern. So textual editing entails engagement. But where things of Baba's were published, the rule of the trust is we don't change that. We don't rewrite that. Like discourses say, or these things in the Mere Message, tiny corrections of subject-verb agreement or, punctuation or spelling, but that's all. But there too, the textual editing brings up, how do you present this? Like in the Mere Message articles, these are articles published 1929, 1931 in India. Well, people today need to know something about that original context, right? And the setting of it, and there are various things you do need to know. So textual editing involves that, how you present it, what an introduction you give, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot to it. It's a highly developed craft that goes all the way back to Aristarchus of Samothrace in the 3rd century BC. It's a very old branch of science, you might say. I have a whole talks on this where I show the quotation. I think he said to rewrite God Speaks, and I forget what he said, but the gist is stylistically, so that it reads more fluently. Those aren't his words, but without changing the facts. And Baba wanted a whole new edition done by Francis, and he gave him dictations of points that should be covered. Baba didn't finish the work with Francis. Like a lot of them will be, remind Baba about this. Remind Baba about worms, germs, and microbes. Okay, well that sounds interesting, but what was Baba going to say about worms, germs, and microbes? And Baba says, and the king of the worms. Well, I'm interested to learn that there is a king of the worms, but how do you rewrite God Speaks when that's all you've been given? So Francis wasn't given enough to do the job. But he did do about 20 pages, and it's, some of Francis's prose, this beautiful fluent prose. So the way he's done God Speaks is just like that. It really does carry exactly the same meaning. I would say it was very, very faithful, but it just reads more fluently. Baba wanted that done. It takes his grace, doesn't it, for all of us? Yeah. Yeah, the intellect is it can be a trap, for sure. It usually is, to tell the truth. Yeah. I would give Francis as an example of a person who dealt with that so splendidly, because he certainly had an intellect. But Baba loved the way he used it. Yeah. So Baba did have people who... I do think the intellect can be helpful if it's used well. Well, I feel so grateful that Baba gave... I've always had a bent to do this, but I was prepared to drop it. You know, if you really do try to serve him, even, you know, even to say that, I mean, can I say I'm really trying to serve him? It's sort of like I'm just being selfish all the time, but sort of nominally I do, and from time to time I'll sort of say, okay, I mean, that's my self-experience. But even that, Baba accepts and will use it. And his guidance is there. His guidance is, like this piece of paper I mentioned where Baba said, I'm the author of this stuff. We wouldn't have known what the hell to do with this, because Baba was the source of the original material, but obviously Ramju and Ghani reworked it. But Baba accepted their reworking as his authorship and said so. With M.S. Irani as author, it says, with Meher Baba as the author, those very words. So that help is there from him, you know. If you really, you know, critical guidance has come like that, time after time. When it was real. Here's another case where I really felt Baba was a miracle. We had with the Tiffin lectures, that's, you know, Baba's talks to his Mandali, 1926-27. They're really wonderful talks. They're very readable. You know, some of these books are hard, but those aren't, I would say. But the manuscript we had been working with for 15 or 20 years had all these, the technical term among textual scholars is lacunae, that is gaps. Like there'll be, in the middle of a sentence, a big blank of space that was meant to be filled in by hand with the Gujarati word, or else 5 lines missing that obviously was meant for a diagram, right? So what the heck are we supposed to do with that, you know? And sometimes you can guess the Gujarati word, but that's hazardous. But a lot of times we'd have no idea. And sometimes it was information that wasn't there otherwise. We couldn't know what Baba wanted to say. So this was torment, you know, year after year after year with this goddamn lacunae, you know. Do you know many people? Here's a sign of a textual editor is they spend their days cursing lacunae. Who else does that? But then I was at the Pearsons, and we're a Mariana program, and you know, Chris and Christy Pearson, and they got a lot of stuff from Phyllis Frederick. So it so happened that I wanted to show to the session a Mirror Message, published magazine. And Chris had them, so he said, oh, let's go get them. And in the process of getting them, I saw these manuscript pages. And what? These are the Tiffin lectures. And what they were was the same manuscript that Merwan and Bao and I had worked with, except it was a carbon copy instead. I mean, I knew it well by this time. But in the carbon copy, they had filled in the lacunae. You know, the diagrams were there, the Gujarati words were there. I mean, what a fluke. In Mariposa, California, there turns up what turned out to be the source manuscript for the whole book. And that was like, it was like a miracle to me. You know, I mean, I'd been working for 15 years with this thing and was stuck. And some of that we could never have guessed. Never. It would be completely impossible. So Baba really does help. That's been my experience. You have to want it, you know. You have to want his help. Most of you here had the good fortune of meeting Francis, which I never did, since he had the very bad habit of living in Australia, which is singularly remote from. I didn't come here in until 2008, but I really do most greatly admire him. And actually, Roy, the very thing, you know, that mind and heart, you know, he had a very brilliant intellect and was also extremely opinionated, you know. He was not bashful about saying what he thought about people. But, you know, then there's this really heartbreaking moments, like Stay with God, suddenly that will pierce through. And I think that's part of what Baba liked about it so much. Francis said that somebody that the piece of praise Baba gave that meant the most to him was, Baba said, it would appeal to the highest intellects and the simplest hearts. And I think that, for intellectual people, you've got to keep your heart open, or you're just going to be a curse to the world. You really do. That takes Baba's grace. Without that, you can't do it. Yeah. And Francis had that, it seems like to me. You guys would know better than me, but from reading his work, I certainly see that. I admire him most greatly. I mean, Francis must have been somebody. I mean, you don't get that position. Of all the people in Baba's work, he had a very unique position to sort of be a commentator on culture and history and literature and art. And Baba had other people who were highly accomplished in the arts, but Margaret Crask, say, or Nerina, but Baba didn't give them that role. And he did to Francis. So you don't get a role like that for nothing. No, that was a powerful experience. I certainly got spiritual training from Bao. He was not bashful about giving it to me. And Eruch too. People would see this very benign and gentle Eruch. But man, if he didn't have to display. Okay, here's a little thing about Eruch, a little episode with Eruch about the sort of spiritual training he would give. I came and, I'd been a professor, hotshot professor, right? I didn't think so, but there was kind of some of that there in India. So it was the first Amartiti of my stay there was coming, and they always had an Amartiti circular. And this was prior to computer typesetting. So they would typeset, and they went through 3 typesets, and each time it would be proofread. So since I was this big hotshot professor, obviously the job should go to me to proofread it. Whereas actual professors, this is a task totally beneath them. You get slaved to do it. But okay, if that's what they expected, okay, I was going to do it. My professor days are over. So I got the first thing from Balna II. Balna II was the one who was bringing this to me. I didn't know that Eruch was in the picture. So I went through and, a lot of mistakes in it. They had to hand set the type. And I really thought I did a pretty good job and gave it back to Balna II. And about 2 days later, Eruch called me in and said, "So, did you do this proofreading?" And I said, well, yeah, Eruch. And he said, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And he had found incredible numbers of things that I'd missed. I didn't know that Eruch was going to be involved in the process at all. So then the second one came, the second version, and I really worked hard on that. I thought I did a really good job, and I still hadn't realized that Eruch was in the. I thought I was working with Balna too. Again, Eruch called me in. So, you proofread this? And, well, yeah, Eruch, I did. He had found this and that and the other thing, and I didn't realize that Eruch is the world's greatest proofreader. I've just learned that later, through this partly. And then a third one came, and I really killed myself. And Eruch called me in again, and this time he was kind of inventing things, like the type was a little bit faint, well, what about that, Obviously, he knew that I knew that he was doing that, although he did find some mistakes. But if the type was faint and I should have fixed that, well, that was my fault then. Okay, that's the game we're playing. So I'd gone through 3, finally it was going to go to the printer, and my first real job that had brought Eruch into the picture, I'd failed completely. I felt that. I had failed completely. And he has glasses that were that thick. I don't know if you remember his glasses. He had this terrible cataract surgery. So I was making this old, venerable Mandali with this poor eyesight to have to read through this whole 25-page thing after me and pick up all that I had missed. I felt absolutely horrible about it. So it was right after that happened that there was a letter that Bao had dictated to Junggu in Pune, who was the trustee. And it had gone back and forth between Bao and Eruch, and I was the one who was typing it and everything. And Eruch was going on a Thursday, and he wasn't going to come on Friday. So Eruch said, okay, print out this letter and send it to Junggu in Pune. So I said, okay. And I went back to my room and I said, okay, no one will ever know, but I am capable of producing a 1.5-page letter that doesn't have any mistakes. And I'm going to do it. So I went through this letter, several hours. I would read it backwards, the, E-H-T, the, every single thing. And I put it in the post and sent it to Junggu. And the next day I went out to Brabazon. And the first thing Eruch asks, not even Jai Baba, he said, that letter to Junggu you did yesterday, did you address it to Meher Dastur Road or Dastur Meher Road? I put the wrong address. And how the hell did he know? It was like, this is ridiculous. Why would he ask that? And I had twisted it around in my mind. At that point I realized, this is hopeless. You can't win. But I did learn later on. There was a volume of glimpses got published, the last one I think. And I was at Eruch's table at the trust when the book arrived. And again, if those of you who knew Eruch, these glasses that were that thick, and he would, his vision was terrible, but he opened the book and he always started at the back and he leafed through a little bit. What's that? It was a typo. And what's that? Another typo. And I myself saw in maybe 2 minutes, I think they wound up finding like 6 mistakes in the whole book. He found like 4 of them in 2 minutes. It was like supernatural. He had an ability in any situation, not just proofreading, but with people were there or something in the room or, if something was amiss, his eye would go straight to it. It was like a supernatural ability. And it would come up all the time. Somebody would come in and we'd be sitting around with him with tea and somebody would just show up and you don't care. All right, so, hey, good to see you. You wouldn't pay much attention. But Eruch would immediately remember that person yesterday was supposed to talk to so-and-so and probably he would bring up something. Did you fix that thing? He would immediately, and it was where a problem had happened. He had this uncanny ability to go straight there. So I'll tell you, getting spiritual training from Eruch, man, he would nail you. Just nail you. And when he really was displeased, that didn't happen often, but when he really was, boy, I would rather have it from anybody else than him. It was crushing, absolutely crushing. Of course, that's a soul we won't see again until Baba comes back, that character. Spending years and years in this space where nobody else is. Like doing these talks at Avatar's Abode, that's my experience is that I've been living with this stuff for years and years and years with no one else there. But now, when it sort of comes out, it's really a very nice satisfaction to see other people engaging it. Yeah. I mean, this stuff will be all over the world in the course of time. Yeah. And I'll be long dead by then. And coming back and I'll probably be illiterate. This doesn't make any sense. I don't understand this. Why couldn't he have written this more simply? Opposite to opposite. That's what we, yeah. Okay, well, big Jai Baba, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Jai Baba. Thanks for doing this. This is a great thing to do. Yeah.